One, I am not a medical professional. I am an herbalist. I've been studying all my life. My specialty is entheogens and poisons, but I am by no means a doctor or a nurse. I cannot prescribe or diagnose or treat any medical condition, syndrome, or disease, and this class in particular is not to be taken as medical advice. Seriously, I'm talking about a poisonous substance. Please don't take this as me telling you to go ingest this substance, and please don't sue us. We're a nonprofit organization. We don't have a lot of money, and what we do have goes directly back into the community. Moving right along. This is a class on herbal abortifacients, and that tends to be a hot button subject. So these are the rules. I don't care what your personal belief in abortion is. If you think that life begins at conception and you think that you should never ever have an abortion, fine, great. You can share that as, I believe this, I think this, but your beliefs end at somebody else's nose. We are not a theocracy, and you don't get to expect that your beliefs should be recognized by law when there's no scientific basis for forcing someone to carry a fetus to term before it's a viable life form with sentience or a functioning circulatory system. Anyway, you are welcome to whatever opinion you have on abortion, as long as it comes out as, well, I don't believe that I should have an abortion, but you believe whatever you want to believe. Everyone clear on that? Fantastic. Then I'm going to move right along because I have a lot of information to cover. So today's herb that we are covering is Tansy. And as I always do when I'm putting together a class, I spent some time pursuing other people's information on Tansy. I read over documents on Tansy that were published on multiple websites, some of whom were put up by professional herbalists, people who give herbal information to others, who put together herbal treatments for others. I read historical documentation and I read some scientific papers. And I gotta tell you, there is a huge amount of misinformation that is coming from a misuse of common terms, and I'm gonna get there in a minute. But before I get much further, I just wanna say, if you don't really do your homework, really do your homework and fully understand plants, don't give people herbalism advice. Don't set yourself up as a professional herbalist if you can't tell the difference between two. I'm so, whew. Okay, I'll get into it. Tansy, Tanacetum vulgare, third time's a charm, right? Is a perennial herbaceous flowering plant of the aster family. It is native to Europe and Asia, but has now been introduced to other parts of the world, including North America. Let's see, scientific names include Chrysanthemum vulgare and Tanacetum vulgare. Those are the same plant. Common names are tansy, common tansy, bitter buttons, golden buttons, garden tansy, scented fern, parsley fern, scented fern. I already said that, and stinking willy. Jeez. Sorry, it's been a long day. Etymology. Tansy is reported to have had a place in Greek funereal rites. It's also had a place of honor in a lot of funereal rites, which we'll get into in a minute. The name Tansy is said to have derived from the Greek word antinon, or immortal, either because the flower lasts a very long time. You can essentially set it aside to dry and it will not desiccate to a ratification for a very long time. It doesn't rot for a very long time, or because of its ability to preserve dead bodies from decomposition, which we'll get into. This is the ranty part, and I beg you to just give me a minute because I have had a long day. There's a major difference between the plant tansy, or common tansy, and tansy ragwort. Tanacetum vulgare, common tansy or tansy, is toxic. It contains the toxic compound thujone. Same compound as in wormwood, which we've already taught an entheogenic class on. We've already taught a poison path class on. So if you've watched those, you're passingly familiar, but most of you know it as an entheogen that makes you see green fairies, although it doesn't actually do that. But it's a toxic compound, and it's one of the means with which you can use an herb to cause an herbal abortion. It is toxic, but it isn't the same kind of toxic as tansy ragwort. Tansy ragwort is Senecio jacobea. Tansy that we're talking about in our class today is naturalized. It was introduced so long ago that it is widespread through most of North America. There's only a few states where it isn't just a common wildflower, a common weed. It's no longer considered an invasive species, and although it is poisonous, it is actually very, very rare for cattle and horses to eat it. It does not smell appealing to them, and if anything, it's really, really bitter, so they tend to avoid eating it. Tansy ragwort, on the other hand, is toxic to cattle and horses in smaller doses than common tansy is. And it doesn't have that unappealing scent, that unappealing bitterness. How many of you have had wormwood? All right, tansy is bitter like wormwood is. It's a thujone-containing plant. They're both bitter. It's not as bitter as wormwood, but it's pretty close. So, common tansy is naturalized. Tansy ragwort was introduced about 90 years ago and is super invasive. It has caused millions of dollars of losses in pasture lands. It has sickened and killed thousands upon thousands of livestock animals. It has been a major problem, and they're trying to kill it off. Actually, Oregon introduced the tansy ragwort flea beetle, which lays eggs on or near the plants, and the larvae burrow into and feed on the roots, killing or injuring it. They also introduced small red and black cinnabar moths, which basically do the same thing. But about 10 years ago, the climate change that is changing our country to be deeply inhospitable to sustaining human life, changing the world, basically killed off those insect communities, and tansy ragwort saw a boom and is back to killing off livestock and damaging pasture lands. The problem with this is that I'm seeing a lot of people in their documentation on common tansy start talking about how don't plant common tansy in your yard. Don't allow it to have any kind of a foothold on your acreage because it'll kill your cattle, it'll kill your horses, it's super invasive, don't be irresponsible. And I'm like, that's not common tansy. That's not a problem that we have with common tansy. That is a problem that is common with tansy ragwort. And I'm seeing people saying, oh, it's super likely that you'll have a dermatological reaction to it and it will look like A, B, and C in symptoms. Nope, that one's also tansy ragwort. Although common tansy does have dermatological effects, they are not as severe or as quick forming as it is with tansy ragwort. So just scientific names, okay? Or at least understand the differences between two plants before you write articles as if you're an expert. Whew, moving right along. Told you it was going to be rant. History. Tansy is native to Eurasia. It's found in almost all parts of mainland Europe, as well as Britain and Ireland. It is it is absent from Siberia and some of the Mediterranean islands. So that's some of the places you don't find it. It has a ridiculously long history of use that's been documented extensively. It was first recorded as being cultivated, intentionally grown, by the ancient Greeks for medicinal purposes. In the 8th century AD, it was grown in the herb gardens of Charlemagne and by Benedictine monks of the Swiss monastery, I'm sorry, I told you I've been having really severe seizures. They mess with my ability to talk. Of St. Gall. The Benedictine monks were documented as growing tansy as an abortifacient. Please see my earlier videos on the history of herbal abortions. Tansy was used to treat intestinal worms, rheumatism, digestive problems, fevers, sores, and to bring out measles, essentially bring it on faster. The intriguing thing about that is that it actually does change blood flow in the body, so although it would not have necessarily made it happen faster, it would have made them visible faster. Anyway, during the Middle Ages and later, high doses were used to induce abortions. Contradictorily, tansy was also used to help people conceive and to prevent miscarriages. We don't fully understand this yet. That very low doses may actually help with conception, and higher doses may be an abortifacient because there haven't been adequate medicinal studies done to that effect. I wouldn't risk using tansy to help you conceive because we don't fully understand at what doses it does one or the other. Medieval Europeans used tansy in their diet as a substitute for cinnamon or nutmeg in certain recipes, an ingredient in baked goods, a main ingredient in puddings served during Lent, and the main ingredient in a form of herbal tea. In the 15th century, Christians began serving tansy with Lenten meals to commemorate the bitter herbs that were eaten by the Hebrew. Tansy was thought to have been added to have had an additional Lenten benefit of controlling the flatulence brought on by days of eating fish and pulses, and of preventing intestinal worms believed to be caused by eating fish during Lent. In the 16th century, it was considered necessary for a garden in Britain, and many garden books described having to have tansy. Thomas Tusser listed tansy in his 1557 instructional poem 500 Points of Good Husbandry as a strewing herb. Strewing herbs are certain kinds of plants that are scattered, strewn over the floor of dwelling places and other buildings. If you read a lot of like high fantasy, these are the rushes that are strewn over the floor to make the house smell good, to keep insects away, and to conceal stuff that's gotten spilled. They tend to be fragrant and astringent herbs, and many serve, like I said, as insecticides or disinfectants. John Gerard, an English botanist with a large herbal garden in London and the author of an 1,484-page illustrated herbal called The General History of Plants, first published in 1597, it became the most prevalent botany book in England in the 17th century, wrote that cakes were made of young tansy leaves in the spring mixed with eggs, which would be pleasant in taste and good for the stomach, for if bad humours cleave thereupon, it doth perfectly concoct them and carry them off. The root, preserved in honey or sugar, is an especial thing against the gout, if every day for a certain space a reasonable quantity thereof be eaten fasting. Nicholas Culpeper, an English botanist, herbalist, physician, astrologer, and author of The Complete Herbal, wrote that tansy, the root eaten, is a singular remedy for the gout. The rich may bestow the cost to preserve it. The Pilgrims brought common tansy seed to the United States as early as 1631 because of its many medicinal uses. In the 1600s, the Massachusetts governor called common tansy a necessity and encouraged even more extensive planting of it in the garden. Europeans and colonial Americans used common tansy in a face wash to lighten and purify their skin, to treat ulcers, constipation, and hysteria, to restore menstrual flow, which, if you remember, was a term for an abortion pre-quickening, which was quite common in colonial America and the 1600s in Europe. let's see, in large doses to induce what they would have considered an abortion, which would have been post-quickening, to treat intestinal worms, rheumatism, jaundice, and digestive problems. And in very small doses, it was again thought to prevent miscarriage and to increase fertility. As a reminder, we don't fully understand this yet. Around the same time, it was documented that many Native Americans started using tansy in their own gardens and spreading its cultivation, as they felt that it was a useful medicinal plant. From the 1660s to the 19th century, European Americans used tansy leaves to ward off flies, ants, and fleas off uncooked meat, thus keeping it fresher longer. Literally wrapping meat in tansy leaves prevents insects from landing on it. This worked especially well if tansy was mixed with elder leaves. Tansy was frequently worn at the time in shoes to prevent malaria and other fevers. It has been shown, however, that some mosquito species, including Culex pipiens, take nectar from tansy flowers, so that may not be as effective as we'd like it to be. From the 1600s to the 19th century, Europeans and Americans used tansy for funerals and death preparations. It was packed into coffins, wrapped in funeral winding sheets, and tansy wreaths were sometimes placed on the dead. By the 19th century, tansy was so used for this purpose that in New England, people began to disdain it and say that it had a morbid association with the dead. Henry Dunster, the first president of Harvard University, was buried wearing a tansy wreath in a coffin packed with tansy. When God's Acre was moved in 1846, the tansy had still maintained its shape and still had its fragrance, which helped to identify the president's remains. They literally were like, we found the right one, he's buried covered in tansy. In the mid-1940s, distilled tansy oil mixed with fleabane, pennyroyal, and diluted alcohol was a well-known mosquito repellent. Collectors were paid 5 cents a pound for tansy in full bloom. In the mid-1970s, common tansy was planted on mine sites being reclaimed in Wyoming. Common tansy has more recently been the subject of research for possible use as a repellent or insecticide for mosquitoes and Colorado potato beetles. We'll get into that in a minute. Alrighty. How poisonous? How harmful? Abortifacients tend to be herbs that are poisonous. There are exceptions, but the majority of them are poisonous or lethal in high enough doses. Everything's lethal in high enough doses. I can hear Ian correcting me, and he hasn't even started typing it. However, common tansy is not commonly reported as a toxic plant unless people are confusing tansy ragwort for it. Animals very rarely ingest it, and this plant rarely occupies enough significant acreage in pastures to be a threat to animals. Illness and death in humans has largely been reported due to attempts at medicinal use of the concentrated plant extract. I'm going to pause here for a second. Don't take any thujone containing essential oil internally. Don't. Just don't. I don't care what it says on Reddit or Yahoo Answers on that one witch's herbalist page. It's not worth it. 10 drops of a thujone containing essential oil, a steam distilled extract concentrated of the volatile oils of a thujone containing plant, is death. It's death. 10 drops. It's not worth it. Let's see. Illness and death in humans has been reported due to attempts at medicinal use of concentrated plant extracts. Toxic signs may include salivating and abdominal pain with the possibility of convulsions occurring. Tansy contains chemicals known to be toxic to humans and grazing livestock. If you eat whole, fresh, or dried preparations of the plant, you will probably not be in any immediate physical danger unless you consume it in very high amounts. But like wormwood, The toxic effects of tansy build up in your system over time, and if you regularly use large amounts of the plant, you can eventually go into convulsions and or die. You can also die if you drink significant amounts of tansy tea or consume 10 or more drops of the concentrated oil. If taken internally, toxic metabolites are produced as the oil is broken down in the liver and digestive tract. Because it contains thujone, the US FDA limits the use of tansy in alcoholic beverages. Any final product must be thujone free. In case any of you were wondering why, if you buy modern absinthe and you drink it, you don't have any of those fun entheogenic experiences, it's because it doesn't contain thujone anymore. Modern alcohol distillation methods remove the thujone. And if you're wondering why in drinking wormwood tea you've had mild but not anywhere near as intensive entheogenic experiences as are described by drinking the absinthe preparations that were drunk by, say, popular artists at the Moulin Rouge, it's because it's not a distillation, it's a tisane. Distillation and thujone. Distillation makes thujone far more potent and basically makes it so that's all you're getting is concentrated thujone. Alcohol distillation made wormwood into that absinthe drink that caused that entheogenic experience. So also don't combine thujone and don't combine thujone and alcohol. It's not a great idea. Okay, moving right along. As little as 10 drops of the essential oil may be lethal, but survival has been reported after ingestions of 15 milliliters. That has been very rare, and it was when they caught it very quickly. Symptoms of internal tansy poisoning include rapid and feeble pulse, severe gastritis, violent spasms, convulsions, uterine bleeding. Treatment with gastric lavage or emesis has been suggested, followed by symptomatic treatment. Alrighty, moving right along. Dermatitis. Let's talk about the dermatitis. Many tansy species contain a volatile oil which can cause contact dermatitis in sensitive individuals. Unlike tansy ragwort, where dermatitis is just ridiculously common and really avoid, if you can, having to pluck that and then touch your skin. Common tansy, it can cause it, but it is less likely than it is with tansy ragwort. If tansy comes into regular or extended contact with your skin, it can produce an allergic condition called contact dermatitis. Potential symptoms of this condition include moderate to severe itching of the affected skin, pain, burning sensations, and the formation of a rash that features scaly or thickened skin, raised red bumps that sometimes turn into blisters, drainage of fluid from those blisters, and unusual skin tenderness or warmth. Common areas for the onset of tansy-related contact dermatitis include your hands, fingers, forearms, and face. In addition to direct contact with tansy, you can develop contact dermatitis if you use natural products that contain tansy as one of their ingredients, including shampoos, soaps, and cosmetics, or insect repellents, because herbal insect repellents commonly contain tansy. You may have a heightened risk of developing a tansy allergy if you have an allergy to chrysanthemums or to any member of the Astraceae family. So if you are sensitive to asters, if you're sensitive to sunflowers, you will probably be sensitive to tansy. Moving right along. Let's talk about the oil, because there's a second plant that it commonly gets confused with. And as I was reading these herbal documents that people had put up with all this expert knowledge that they were sharing with unexperienced people who were wanting to learn about this herb, I came across a few times people saying, oh, and the essential oil of tansy is a lovely blue. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. The essential oil of a different plant, Tanacetum annuum, is blue, but not of Tanacetum, uh, not of Tanacetum vulgare. That's clear. Um, they're completely different chemically. Blue tansy oil contains no thujone, but contains high amounts of chamazoline, making the oil dark blue and giving rise to its common name, blue tansy oil. Blue tansy oil is very expensive, and it is not uncommon to see someone selling the oil from Tanacetum vulgare, the common tansy, as blue tansy oil. However, because Tanacetum vulgare has a high thujone content, that is not a safe substitution. And if you were, just for example, to be an herbalist operating online, and you were to say, list that tansy oil is the same thing as blue tansy oil, right? They're the same plant. And someone's on a different website and they see all these medicinal benefits of blue tansy oil, and they don't realize that that's because it's supposed to be blue, right? They think, oh, it's just the name of the plant, right? Just like red rose oil isn't red. And they buy from a website tansy oil, right? And they go, oh, this is perfectly safe to take internally. You see how that would play out badly? Do you see why misinformation kills people? It kills people. It does. Anyway, moving right along. The oil is far more toxic. I wrote down all the toxic extracts that come up in essential oil of tansy. I'm not going to get into it at this time. The notes are available if you want to join our mailing list, which goes out to all of our patrons, regardless of whether they give $1 a month or $50 a month. Let's move into medicinal uses, shall we? Historical medicinal uses. The medicinal use of tansy goes back at least as far as the ancient Greeks. Since that time, internal preparation of the plant's leaves and tops have been used for purposes that include, but are not limited to, purging parasitic intestinal worms, increasing fertility, reducing the chances of a miscarriage, reducing intestinal gases, easing stomach distress and intestinal spasm, reducing the frequency of epileptic seizures, relieving anxiety, hysteria, or nervousness, reducing low-grade fevers, easing the effects of the arthritic condition called gout, and relief of rheumatoid arthritis, relief of skin eruptions, and treatment of sprained joints. Those are not necessarily anything that I would recommend taking the plant for, but it is what it's historically been used for. Among Native Americans currently, the Salagi use an infusion of the plant for backache, use the plant as a tonic, and wear it around the waist and in shoes to prevent miscarriages. The Salagi use an infusion of the pulverized leaves and blossoms for dizziness and overall weakness, right? Which, common fatigue, essentially. Modern medicinal uses. Where am I? Various Tanacetum species are used ethnomedicinally to treat migraine, neuralgia, and central nervous system pain, basically misfirings of the central nervous system. This is intriguing because if you take too much wormwood or tansy or any other thujone containing herb, it will actually cause a seizure. But if you take very little of it, it can prevent a seizure. Now, I've experimented with this extensively, and I can say, yeah, there's definitely a tick over. But it's not my preferred method of preventing a seizure. That's actually, it's an herbal substance called benedictine, which probably contains tansy, as well as other thujone containing plants, but it'll also taste like good cough syrup. Anyway, moving right along. Tansy is a very effective insecticide. It's highly toxic to arthropods. Tansy does repel mosquitoes, but not as effectively as products containing DEET. But DEET is also a mutagenic, where as tansy is not unless taken internally in very high doses. In 2008, researchers in Sweden investigated the use of tansy to repel ticks, showing a 64 to 72% repellency for each oil constituent. So that's actually really good. Oil of tansy has a strong variance. Not strong, that's the wrong word. I'm sorry that I'm seizing while I'm trying to teach this class. It's actually why I didn't host it yesterday. And I am doing better today, but it's definitely like sort of bashing myself against the wall of not high variance. Thank you, Ian. Like any thujone containing plant, the soil content changes how much thujone any given plant contains. So some plants are very highly repellent and some plants are less repellent. They did find that Colorado potato beetles are strongly repelled by the commercial oil of tansy or by the if you hot water infusion. Thank you. Oh my gosh, it's like thinking through a wall. The extraction process absolutely affected the mortality of spider mites. Basically, extracts got through steam distillation were 60 to 75% effective against spider mites on plants, whereas hot water infusions were less than 16% effective against spider mites. Definitely worth it to get the oil if you're going to be using it to kill bugs. As an anti-inflammatory, this one they actually studied a little bit. Now they studied it on animals, and they found that edema was inhibited by 93% by tansy, which is just 93%. That's amazing. But it's not something that you can stay on for very long, or that you can take frequently, or that you can take in very high doses. So and that was in mice, not humans. Anyway, as an anti-ulcer, it's been studied, and it did reduce gastric lesions. But in particular, that was a dose-dependent reduction using an ethanol extraction. Can any of my students tell me what I just said? Anyone? It's an alcoholic tansy. Helped with ulcers in rats. Yeah, tincture, right? Tincture or an alcohol distillate. So like I drink Benedictine. Tansy has some degree of antimicrobial activity against both gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, which is kind of fascinating, and has been observed killing Bacillus subtilis, Escherichia coli. I'm not even going to try. You know what? There's a whole list of bacteria that it's perfectly capable of killing. But on top of a seizure, I'm not going to try to pronounce those words. It's not going to happen right now. However, it is not recommended that you use tansy alone as an antimicrobial agent. It is recommended that you combine it with other antimicrobial substances. Intriguingly, one clinical study that I could find into the medicinal use of tansy in humans was in those who were living with HIV, where they used it in combination with other materials as an antimicrobial. So, as a sialagogue and circulatory aid, the chemicals in tansy increase saliva, which is what a sialagogue is, and blood flow to the tissues in the mouth, stomach, intestines, and pelvic areas. Some researchers think the chemicals may also increase blood flow to the brain, which is one of the reasons why they think it may help with epilepsy up to a certain dosage and then cause an epileptic seizure if you take too much. Alrighty, for abortion, tansy is a very, very strong herb to be using for abortion. And while we, of course, would never, ever tell someone to use Tansy for an abortion, and we are only documenting this information because we believe it is historically relevant and that all knowledge should be preserved, if we were to tell you to use Tansy as an abortifacient, which of course we would not, we would tell you to use it as early as possible so as to be able to avoid taking a high dose. It should always be used with severe caution, and dosages and duration should be watched carefully. This is not something to use casually without a calendar, without recording your dosages. And it's not something where you should ignore concerning medical symptoms. Look, I'm about to give some advice, right? Just a little bit of advice. If you were to have to go into a hospital and you didn't want to say, I took an abortifacient herb, you could, of course, say, I took an anti-parasitic herb. I thought I had a parasite. And all the herbalists online said this was an anti-parasitic, anti-worming herb. And I was so concerned about those parasites that I took too much and for too long and get that medical attention without ever having to say that you took an abortifacient herb for abortifacient purposes. Now, of course, I would never recommend that you do so, but if you are going to seek medical attention, you should be able to rattle off your dosages, how much you took, and for how long, because it's medically relevant. All right. Remember that dosage varies based on age, other medications that you're on. Everything has contraindications. Everything has reasons why you shouldn't take it. Just please keep that in mind. Alrighty, moving right along. We already said not to take the essential oil. Thujone is a uterine stimulant, which means that it causes the uterus to be stimulated, and that can cause hemorrhaging. Hemorrhaging is very, very dangerous. If you are hemorrhaging, you should seek immediate medical attention. People who have had epileptic seizures or other seizures in the past should not take high dosage of Thujone at all. Just, nope, you can't use this one as an herbal abortifacient or as an anti-worming thing or any of that. Let's see. Intriguingly, I found several midwives, including Susan Weed, who wrote that Tansy tincture induces an abortion even when menstruation is several weeks overdue. Let's see. One of Susan's students was documented as using Tansy as a backup to regular birth control method, claiming that if ever she was concerned that she was a little late or had been not as safe as she should be, she would drink an infusion of the flowers and leaves for a week before her period was due, and her period always came on time. A different midwife wrote, I once clinically saw a woman who claimed to rely solely on Tansy tea to induce menstruation each month and used no other birth control. She said that around the time her period was due, she would drink one strong cup of Tansy tea in the evening and her period would be there the next day. Sometimes it might require 2 cups, but never more than that. I don't think even 3 or 4 cups of Tansy tea is harmful, and in fact it is very useful acute herbal medicine for worms, fevers, colds, stopped menses, nausea, and as a lotion for scabies. The woman used the Tansy using a handful of the dried aerial part of the herb or a handful and a half of the fresh aerial parts, steeped in 1 or 2 cups of water. She said she would drink 1 cup in the evening and 1 in the morning to bring on menstruation each month, and no more than that was needed. That's intriguing to me. I certainly wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend using it as a form of birth control. But it's fascinating that I came across multiple records of people doing so. I haven't tested it, have epilepsy. That would not be a great idea for me. but it was an interesting note. If you do choose to take Tansy for any reason and you are pregnant and it does not induce an abortion, you should follow up with a clinical abortion, whether or not you wanted the child. It's contraindicated to drink Tansy while pregnant if you intend to keep the child, because Tansy contains thujone, which is a mutagenic in high dosage, and will mutate the fetus. It disrupts normal DNA and cell replication. It causes birth defects. So even if you're not using it to terminate pregnancy, if you're just drinking it for some other purpose, if you are pregnant or trying to become pregnant, don't take this herb. Okay. It is contraindicated to use Tansy as an abortifacient or for any other reason if you menstruate heavily, if you have liver problems, kidney problems, if you are phototoxic, which makes if you're extra sensitive to sunlight, or if you've ever developed an allergic reaction to a member of the sunflower family or chrysanthemums. Okay. Culinary uses. Tansy was formerly used as a flavoring for puddings and omelets. It is now almost entirely unknown, except in Cork, where it is used in a sauce to accompany dressings. Let's see. During the Restoration, a tansy was a sweet omelet flavored with tansy juice. According to liquor historian A.J. Bainey, in the 19th century, Tennessee whiskey magnate Jack Daniels enjoyed drinking his own whiskey with sugar and a crushed tansy leaf as his bitters. It is connected with some rather interesting old customs that are observed at Easter time. Even when archbishops and bishops played handball with men of their congregation. And the tansy cake was the reward to the victor. These tansy cakes were made from the young leaves of the plants mixed with eggs and were thought to purify the humors of the body after the limited fare of Lent. In time, this custom obtained a kind of symbolism, and tansies, as these cakes were called, came to be eaten on Easter Day as a remembrance of the bitter herbs eaten by the Hebrew on the Passover. Let's see. A recipe using tansy from an old cookery book is beat 7 eggs, yolks and whites separately, add a pint of cream, near the same of spinach juice, and a little tansy juice gained by pounding in a stone mortar, a quarter of a pound of Naples biscuit, sugar to taste, a glass of white wine, and some nutmeg. Set all in a saucepan just to thicken over the fire, then put in a dish lined with paste to turn out and bake it. Okay, so I don't know. I have a couple students that have been with me for a long time. What would the combination of nutmeg and thujone do to a person? Any guesses? Anyway, household uses. Some traditional dyers use tansy to produce a golden yellow color. The yellow flowers are dried for use in floral arrangements. Yes, you are definitely going to have a good time. Well done, Tina. Yeah, it is a combination of nutmeg and thujone. They're both euphorics, and one of them is a hallucinogen. Well, they're both hallucinogens, but you have to take a great deal of nutmeg to have the hallucinatory properties, not just the euphoric qualities, and you don't want to have that much nutmeg. Please don't be like, Melissa said that it was a euphoric hallucinogen. In high enough doses to cause hallucinations, you are no longer experiencing euphoria. Nutmeg causes vicious nightmares. Anyway. Household uses. Tansy is used as a companion plant. It accompanies cucumbers and squash, roses and berries because it repels ants, cucumber beetles, Japanese beetles, squash bugs, and other things that eat. In England, tansy is placed on windowsills to repel flies. Sprigs are placed in bed linens to drive away pests, and it is commonly used as an ant repellent. Dried tansy is used by some beekeepers as a fuel in a bee smoker. I'm going to skip the description, where to find it, parts used, and go straight to dosing. I'll detail several different dosage instructions that I found on different midwives' pages, which of course are not a recommendation. Tansy should be used with caution. It is best to use Tansy for no longer than 5 days, 7 max. The dried herb or tincture may be used, or the fresh herb may be used. It is unlikely that you will find the tincture in an herbal store near you, but if you find a qualified herbalist, they may be willing to make it for you. To make a tea, use 1.5 to 1 teaspoon of the dried herb per 8 ounces of water 3 to 4 times a day for up to 7 days. For the tincture, use 1/4 to 3/4 teaspoon in a cup of warm water, so 8 ounces of warm water, 3 to 4 times a day. Never ever take the essential oil internally. Do not combine Tansy as an abortifacient with vitamin C as an abortifacient, as they counteract each other. Do not confuse Tansy, Tanacetum vulgare, with Tansy ragwort, Senecio jacobei, which causes irreversible liver damage and has been known to kill cattle who eat very little of it. As a reminder, the amount of thujone present in Tansy is highly variable, and some plants can contain no traces of it, while others contain up to, a rather large amount of thujone. Therefore, with every new batch that you make, it is recommended, start out with a low dose in order to test your sensitivity and see if you have a strong reaction, and then you can go ahead and drink the recommended dosage. So basically, treat it like you would marijuana, okay? You know how they say take a couple puffs and wait a little bit, or take a couple bites and wait a little bit? Thujone is like that. Any thujone containing plant is like that. Anyway, for the infusion, this particular midwife says, steep the plant for 30 minutes, use 1/2 to 1 teaspoon of dried herb per 8 ounces, 3 to 4 times a day for up to 7 days. So actually exact same information, never mind. Serves me right for not comparing before I got on video. Thank you all for joining us. Please be safe out there. And like I ranted through a great deal of the video, if you're going to teach herbal information, at least be able to tell plants apart. Take the time to look up the scientific name and make sure that the plant that you're looking at is the one you think you're looking at. Because misinformation with herbs like this will get someone killed. You have someone go out into the forest thinking that they're picking up common tansy to have an at-home abortion, and it turns out they're picking up, tansy ragwort, and it's going to kill someone. So please be responsible. Check your sources. Double check your sources. Triple check your sources. And for those of you out there, be very, very careful what you put inside your body. Reddit answers and Yahoo answers are not your friends. Do your homework. Extensively do your homework. If it seems too good to be true, if the information just seems to present everything you want and it's super easy and it's super safe, double check, triple check. Thank you all for your understanding. Thank you for joining us. I hope you have a good evening and be safe out there.